So now that the dust has settled on Gorillaz' latest release, Cracker Island, where does it rank among their discography? Or for that matter, where do any other albums rank? My name's Connor from 905 Review. You might remember me from my beginner's guide to Gorillaz I made either the first, second, or third time it got posted, as YouTube's copyright has a love-hate relationship with it, but I appreciate you tuning me in today as we will go through and rank all of Gorillaz' albums, and make sure to keep track back at home because I would love to hear how your list either compares or differs from mine. With that being said, let's get started. At number 8, the weakest of the bunch, Cracker Island making an appearance already. This album came out just shy of a year ago, and I was pretty surprised by this release. The band's previous effort saw them putting out one song each month with a notable featured artist on it, which when all was said and done was Song Machine Season 1, Strange Times. Now, naturally, I expected a Season 2 of this, which is apparently what bandleader Damon Albarn initially had in mind, though he ditched that idea after only a couple songs in favor of a more typical album structure. On Cracker Island, Gorillaz stay in a similar lane as they have been since reuniting in the mid-2010s, being this new age, dancey, disco sound, as you can hear on the title track featuring Thundercat, or the song New Gold featuring Tame Impala and Gorillaz veteran Booty Brown. There are also a couple slower tracks that still manage to get the body moving, most notably Oil featuring the legendary Stevie Nicks, though unfortunately I would call this one of her less impressive performances, as well as the Latin track Tormenta featuring Puerto Rican rapper Bad Bunny, who really brings the heat on one of the best songs on this LP. Cracker Island feels very much like a nighttime album, as I imagine the songs Silent Running and Cracker Island probably sound best when cruising through the lights in the dark. So why does this rank so low in the discography then? Well, to be honest, I do have a number of bones to pick with it. For starters, that album art is just atrocious, and maybe you'll agree with me here, maybe you'll disagree. Personally, I thought a lot of these songs sounded uninspired. I mean, they don't really experiment much, they don't really progress much, they don't go out and adventure at all, which is a real shame because the one song that fits that criteria best, Skinny Ape, sucks because the whole second half of it is just Damon going, skinny little, skinny little, skinny little, skinny little, ape, 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 ape. I'm not lying. Baby Queen at least sounds like a Gorillaz song, you know what I mean? But the same can't be said for all the songs on here. I mean, honestly, you could probably swap out Albarn's vocals for The Weeknd's and nobody would be the wiser. That's a lot of criticism, but at the end of the day, I'm still stamping this thing with a C+ grading. I mean, it's not the worst thing out there. I can bear all these songs, even Skinny Ape just for a laugh, but I wouldn't consider any of these songs even individually in A-grade territory. Coming in at number 7.5 now, as a bonus entry, is the 2001 compilation G-Sides. G-Sides is of course a play on words, as this compilation is made up of B-Sides, being songs that didn't make the cut of the original self-titled Gorillaz album, or are remixes of others, just things that appeared on the B-sides of singles released at the time. These include a Soulchild remix of the hit song 19-2000, a radio edit of Rock the House, which censors featured rapper Del the Funky Homo Sapiens' profanity, as well as omitting his final verse, and Clint Eastwood as it was originally intended, featuring the English hip-hop group Phi Life Cypher, as opposed to the later version featuring Del that made the album that everybody knows and loves. The trouble I have with remixes is, if it's of a song you're already familiar with or enjoy a lot, it's going to be hard to outdo that, and I already have preferred versions of all these songs, being the ones from the album that I'm so familiar with. There is another deep cut here featuring Phi Life Cypher, being The Sounder, and it really is a hidden gem in Gorillaz' discography. I love the string-based beat to it, the energy the trio brings, but it really does shine pretty high above all the other tracks on here. The other songs on here are pretty good though, understandably still having that same early Gorillaz sound, as these are from those same sessions as the original album. Faust wasn't too far behind, being a predominantly chill instrumental, and Ghost Train and Left Hand Suzuki Method were both songs I liked but felt could have been better, the first suffering from what I found to be annoying vocals, and the second from a violin that I felt contrasted the beat too much, didn't really fit in. as well as having a spoken word format that I feel like just more typical singing would have worked better with. With that being said, G-Sides gets a B- from me. I don't know how often I would check this out start to finish again, but it is something for Gorillaz fans to listen to, peruse through these songs, see what they like, but for me personally, I could have just done with it as an EP instead. Coming in at number 7.55 now, I know we'll get to another real album soon enough, bear with me. For now we have Demon Days live at the Manchester Opera House. When Demon Days came out in 2005, instead of having a traditional tour to support it, Gorillaz instead set up a residency in Manchester where they would play the album in full 5 nights in a row, with this being the best selection of each song. Being a band that always had so much emphasis on visuals, it makes sense to watch the footage from this show, but by only having the audio, you're really cutting that magic in half. On top of that, I feel like bands that improve most in a live setting are generally the heavier, rougher ones, because there's just this added sense of grit to it a lot of times in the recording. So for a band like Gorillaz that relies on pristine production on a lot of them, creating beautiful soundscapes on songs like El Mañana, that really gets lost here as you're relying on everybody perfecting everything in a single take, and you're limited to just what's being done on stage. In fact, the song that improves the most here is White Light, one I'm not even that crazy about, but being probably the roughest on Demon Days, it excels in this live setting. I did enjoy the more energetic and audible bass guitar here though, notable on Dirty Harry, Oh Green World, and Feel Good Inc. Another highlight and a benefit of setting up a residency is with the sheer amount of features on Demon Days, they were actually able to get everybody involved in playing it live. Booty Brown on Dirty Harry, though, it really sounded like he had to rap at the top of his lungs to avoid being drowned out by all the other sound. De La Soul on Feel Good Inc., who they even brought that hysterical laugh they do in the song with them. They crushed that live. MF Doom was killer on November Has Come, as was Roots Manuva All Alone. I was curious whether Dennis Hopper was actually there because his monologue on Fire Coming Out the Monkey's Head sounded absolutely on par with the album recording, like to the point where I was second guessing if he even was there or if they just reused the audio from the album. And most notable was Sean Ryder on Dare. If you already know this, you already know this, but he is just hammered performing at this show. It's kind of funny, but it's also, upsetting at the same time that his alcoholism was at that point. But if you watch it, you can even see Damon Albarn's silhouette crack up laughing at one point, and you can't help but feel bad for Roses Gabor, who voices Noodle on this album, having to share the stage with him and looking quite uncomfortable, but she still absolutely delivers her part. So I'm stamping this with a B grading. If you want to experience the show, you may as well watch the footage of it, and I feel like pretty much all the songs sound better on the studio album anyways. So at the number 7 spot for real now, we have Humans. Being recorded late 2015 through to 2016, it was an interesting time in America as Donald Trump was running for president, and that's the basis of this album. Albarn wanted his collaborators to picture what a Trump-run United States would look like, which in his eyes was kind of the end of the world. So this album was supposed to be one last party before everything goes to hell. That theme is hard to ignore on this album, especially the second half of it with songs like Let Me Out and Hallelujah Money. But with a political album, that's probably what you want, right? To get people up and talking about these things. And while part of me thinks that could alienate like half your fan base, I'm sure Albarn's more focused on just getting his message and his beliefs out there than trying to appease everybody. Despite that, I recall this album getting a pretty subpar reception upon release. I was in that same boat myself. It had been 7 years since Gorillaz' last legitimate album. They had kind of split up, and this was their first release since getting back together, and not much on here really lived up to those expectations. But I will admit a number of these have really grown on me as time's gone on. Strobe Light's become one of my go-tos from the album. Saturn's Bars with its big spacey sound and percussion and the feature of Jamaican singer Popcan. Moments is a fun one to sing and chime into, and We Got the Power is just such this beautiful, heartfelt, loving song about, just having care for and appreciating each other. And Albarn even got Noel Gallagher on this, putting all that beef between Blur and Oasis back in the day behind them. The downsides to this album are its length and the use of interludes, just meaningless ones. There's 5 of them, plus an intro to technically make 6, creating a 20-song track list that, by the time I was done listening, I was blown away that it was only 50 minutes, having felt probably close to double that. So I can only imagine how the super deluxe edition, 34-track, hour-and-a-half album experience would go. Another thing critics really got right here is Albarn just absolutely takes a back seat. I mean, Gorillaz are no strangers to features, but this thing is just loaded with them. Probably half these songs he only has a handful of lines on, having none at all on Strobe Light nor Carnival. And so Humans gets a B grading from me. It's got a fun overall dance mood despite the apocalyptic direction to it. There were a number of subpar songs I can do without, like Sex Murder Party, Charger, which it felt like was a waste of time to bring in Grace Jones to ad-lib for 4 hours over if they were only going to use 10 lines. Another thing that took me by surprise was when Gorillaz was first conceptualized, it was with a mature audience in mind, but I think we can agree a lot of us got into the band as kids, right? So for the first album to feature Vince Staples, like one of the realest rappers out there right now, rapping about racial disparity and police brutality, which, I mean, hey, he does a killer job doing that, but I was just blown away to hear a hard N-bomb dropped on the first song of a Gorillaz project. Coming in at 6.5 as another bonus is Laika Come Home, and this is an interesting one because it's technically not a Gorillaz album. Bear with me here. It's by a group called Space Monkeys, who they are a part of the Gorillaz universe. They've been included in, the artwork in that, and initially, they just did a remix of the song Tomorrow Comes Today off the first album. Albarn liked it so much he asked them if they would do an entire album worth of remixes, and this remains essentially the only thing the group's ever done, so I can kind of justify including it in here. With that being said, every song from Gorillaz outside of Double Bass and Latin Simone earn a dub remix, complete with echo effects, steel drums, horns, the typical whole note rhythm guitar, just giving all the songs a more chill, relaxed vibe than they were originally conceived with. What I noticed is that a lot of my least favorite songs off Gorillaz I tended to prefer in this setting, such as Depunked, though it still suffered from Punk's vocals, the slow country remix Strictly Rub-a-Dub featuring reggae DJ U Brown, as well as Monkey Wrench over the original Man Research. On the contrary to this, the remixes of my favorite songs didn't shine as brightly. Crooked Dub and A Fistful of Peanuts, despite the latter's clever title, were quite the noticeable drop from Soundcheck and Clint Eastwood. With that in mind, I'm stamping Laika Come Home with a B grading. It's certainly worth checking out if you're a fan of the first Gorillaz album. However, once again, I find it hard for a remix to improve over a song you're already familiar with, especially if it's one that you already enjoy. I do have to give Space Monkeys some credit for creating an entirely new atmosphere out of the same components to these original songs. It would be worth listening to again, though I will admit the feeling has to be there for it. And at number 6 now is The Fall. This was Albarn's mid-tour project, creating this album essentially entirely on an iPad across 32 days while on the road in North America playing Plastic Beach. What's neat is that the tracklist even goes in the order that these songs were made, but admittedly I do kind of have mixed feelings on this album. It doesn't really feel like a Gorillaz album, which I'm sure is just because of the process in which this one was made, which, while exceptionally cool, doesn't automatically translate into a good release. But what I realized in my analysis of this album is that by ending on the absolutely unnecessary 38-second track Seattle Yodel, in which you just have yodeling layered over itself multiple times, my last impression of this album was a bad one, and I fear it kind of undid all the work that went into previous tracks, because Listening to it over again, I realized just how many of these there were that I did enjoy. And Damon Albarn has such a knack for his synth work, just finding great sounds and furthermore, sounds that work well together. I mean, the opening track, Phoner to Arizona, the main rhythm synth on it sounds like a fart, and somehow he makes this killer song out of it. On top of that, I didn't even realize that like the main melody synth to it is just some heavily modified text-to-speech. Another impressive moment is on Hillbilly Man, where he samples a bear growl, and I'm thinking he might have done a similar thing here because with how much the chorus sounds like this growl, I'm wondering if he just chopped up the sounds of it to have what sounds like this bear saying the song's title. Other songs that bear sounds that I really enjoyed were Chi-Town, The Snake in Dallas, and Bobby in Phoenix. I honestly wasn't crazy about the album's lead single, Revolving Doors. I tend to be pretty picky on electronic-based pop music, especially if one like this, employing a hip-hop type beat, but then also utilizing so much acoustic guitar in it. The two just don't often mesh that well in my eyes. But he did do it well on Bobby in Phoenix. I mentioned Seattle Yodel already, but the Speak It Mountains was another bit that felt largely unnecessary, just Albarn experimenting with more text-to-speech. With everything considered, I'm stamping The Fall with a B grading, which honestly is quite the step up from what I initially had it as, but it did take a number of listens to get to this point, so do with that what you will. Moving on to the 5.5 spot now, I have D-Sides. D-Sides is a compilation much like G-Sides was of outtakes and B-Sides, though this time coming from the Demon Days sessions. And so that sound and style from Demon Days of course carries over into these songs here being from the same sessions, and you really get the sense that Albarn knew what he was doing at this time, as even some of these outtakes really shine. The laid back and funky spitting out the demons probably stands out the most here, though Hong Kongaton, Hong Kong, and Bill Murray are also worth mentioning, as is We Are Happy Landfill, considering at one point it was the working title of the album Demon Days. Being B-sides, it's not surprising some of these didn't make the cut, some because they just aren't that great, and others because even if they're not terrible, the time did feel better spent on the songs that really did make it onto the album. There's also a couple demos on here, an early version of the hit Dare known as People, as well as an alternate version of Don't Get Lost in Heaven. And this one really was quite tough to rate because there's actually a second disc to it, being all remixes. You already know how I feel about remixes, but the ones that stand out most were the rocking Junior Sanchez remix of Dare, the DFA remix, also of Dare. There was a third Dare remix. There were 3 Kids with Guns remixes, so out of your 9 songs, there's 6 of them already. There was also a remix of Dirty Harry, utilizing native Chinese instruments, Chinese lyrics, Chinese rapping, so that was different. And so I stamped D-Sides with a B grading. Realistically, it probably would have been a B+ if not for the second disc, but I feel I have to take that into consideration as well. On the first disc, there's some really good hidden gems though, and not even just for big-time Gorillaz fans, but really for anybody at all. And at the number 5 spot now, we have Song Machine, Season 1, Strange Times. This was the previously stated project Albarn had going on where once a month, a new song with a different collaborator would come out, and this was something that was slowed down but not entirely halted by the COVID outbreak. And that's really where the Strange Times part comes into mind, as that was the title of the first song in this project created following the pandemic shutting everything down, featuring The Cure's Robert Smith, and this was a whole new world we were into, and yeah, some pretty strange times at that. And one thing so many of us struggled with that was loneliness and isolation, which would become a recurring theme throughout this album, though I wouldn't blame you if you missed it, as in typical Gorillaz fashion, these themes are hidden under some fun tunes. You got the smooth The Lost Chord, the goofy Pac-Man, the tender Elton John featured the Pink Phantom. It also seemed at this time that Albarn was very doubtful of himself, just kind of wondering his place in life, evident on some of these songs, as well as Strange Times and Chalk Tablet Towers. Another thing that became apparent with the shutdowns was the disparity between celebrities in Hollywood and everyday people, and there were instances of kind of dragging them down from the pedestal so many hold them up to. I felt like The Valley of the Pagans featuring Beck reflected on this. The chill and funky song that is Momentary Bliss, one of my favorites from the album, featuring the rock stylings of Soft Play, formerly known as Slaves, though understandably had to change their band name, and the provocative nature of rapper Slow Tie also seemed to dwell on this a little bit. While there were features aplenty, it didn't seem like Albarn shied away from the spotlight as he had on Humans, sharing a notable presence with those already named, as well as the likes of St. Vincent and Schoolboy Q. With all that considered, I will be stamping Song Machine Season 1 Strange Times with a B+ grading, earning a slight boost from its unique premise being something that fans can often look forward to. Now, is that fair of me to do, considering this isn't considered one of their most impressive albums? Sure, I don't care, this is my list. But even though there aren't any bad songs on here, there aren't too many exceptional ones either, making for a consistently average listen. And next at number 4, I have the Now Now. Albarn really wanted to capitalize on Gorillaz' return, so much so that he was making new music while still touring to promote Humans. And with the disappointment that was Humans, I feel like the Now Now kind of flew under the radar, but really this was quite the redemption for Gorillaz. And it's impressive how much of a stylistic change they were able to manage in such a short time, considering, again, these songs were being written, some even performed, during the Humans tour. The album was still quite funky, and while some songs were able to maintain a club-like atmosphere, it wasn't nearly as present as it was on its predecessor, with Trance and Hollywood maybe being the only examples. With that being said, I think the Now Now also had a very fitting album cover. More of it felt down than up, hence the moody 2D on it, and it didn't feel flat at all, you know? It wasn't just this straightforward acoustic album. They maintained a very funky sound on songs like Kansas, Sorcerers, and maybe best of all, Fireflies. Additionally, I might call this Gorillaz' best produced album. Oftentimes there is so much going on at once, and yet it never feels overwhelming or unnecessary. On top of that, the album didn't feel very long. I was surprised to see it was only 11 tracks and a very standard 40-minute runtime, probably feeling closer to 30 or so, and coming after Humans, honestly, it was refreshing to not hear any politics, even if some of the best songs in the group's discography does. And so I think I'm going to give this one a B+ grading. That might sound a little low based what I've said on it, and this was a pretty hard one to pin down, but I wouldn't say there's too many heavyweight tracks on it, so I don't get the urge to listen to it too often, though when I do, it is a pretty good time. So now we're on to the top 3, and I might rustle a couple feathers here, but taking home bronze, I've got Plastic Beach. This was the much anticipated follow-up to Demon Days, and unbeknownst to us at the time, was the start of the end for Gorillaz' original run. While you might expect it to be tiring hearing a full hour's worth of songs dedicated to saving the environment, Albarn absolutely delivers on this album here. I mean, some of these songs are just fantastic. I must shout out Empire Ants before any else for being absolutely incredible, and to give them props where it's due, even these messages, like they do with their darker ones, well, I guess, you know, the death of the environment's kind of dark, but they hide these messages under these fun, catchy pop tunes, so, you know, maybe you'll end up enjoying the song, it'll stick with you, then you go out and look into it, and you're like, oh wow, this has been about, you know, saving the planet the whole time. Notable on Some Kind of Nature or the song Plastic Beach itself. On top of that, it's not just the singular issue of we're destroying the environment, it's all sorts of different contributing factors towards that, allowing for a bunch of variety here. And even doubling down with that, it's not always so in your face the way that they describe these things in the lyrics, so as to not come across as some boring PSA that you get tired of so easily, which is probably why this album works as well as it does. He tries to reach out to you any way he can, even if that's through, you know, a comedic parody such as Super Fast Jellyfish. Even messages aside, I love the musical components across this album. Albarn is killer with his synth work on songs like Stylo, Broken, and Plastic Beach, and I love that electronic direction he further pursued, only in this case having the occasional tropic toppings to it. I also thought that the ending of the album, at least my interpretation of it, was incredible because, going towards the end, you have all these songs about how we're ruining and damaging the environment, and you get this cheerful, happy pirate jet track at the end, but they're not giving you some sort of false positivity. They're giving you the ending that you do deserve, because so many of us, we advocate for saving the environment, we want to do stuff, but then it's something else entirely to actually go out and put the effort in and not just let that thought trickle to the back of your mind and then, forget about it and go on about your day. So I'm very torn because I want to give this an A- just for how conscious it is, but it doesn't sit right with me hearing these songs through and thinking of it as higher than a B+ experience. I do have to give Albarn mad props though, because so many people out there can just write a save the environment song, but how many could make a good album out of it? You know what I mean? And again, it's unfortunate that this ended up being the start of the end for Gorillaz with the sheer amount of features on here. I mean, Snoop Dogg, De La Soul, Yasin Bey, Lou Reed, Marky Smith, who was disappointingly underutilized, really pushing the, artistic visual aspect of the band to the background with all these big name features on stage. And taking silver today, I have Gorillaz. It was originally just a side project for Albarn to, put out this different stuff that wasn't going to really work with his band Blur, and look at where it's gotten him today. With that being said, this album had the biggest presence of rock and guitars across Gorillaz' discography. As time went on, rock kind of fell out of the limelight, and that was also reflected in it having less of a presence in, subsequent Gorillaz albums. But with that being said, there's so many different influences and styles that went into this thing. It's so hard to categorize, though the go-to defining genre would be trip hop, just for the amount of hip hop beats there are on here, even if there's no actual rapping on these songs, though that is of course still present on hits like Rock the House featuring Del the Funky Homo Sapien, or his other appearance that everybody knows and loves, Clint Eastwood. It's very much a catchy pop album too, with hits like 19-2000, and like I was saying, that rock presence is still here on songs Punk and M1A1. The vast array of styles is nice and remarkably well done, as so many mixed bag albums that try too many different things on them, it's so easy for them to fall apart, not being able to stay within at least somewhat of a confined sound, but Gorillaz really achieved that here. While I do admire that, I will be stamping Gorillaz with a B+ grading, and I honestly think it's because I find Albarn tries too many different vocal styles on here. One that bothers me the most is his enunciation of hard syllables, or actually the lack thereof. It's like taking the British accent and fully overdoing it. He's also got this high-pitched, scratchy voice that he uses on Rehash and New Genius, and for me that just makes this album somewhat hit or miss, though there are a lot of hits here. And so who does that leave at number 1 but Demon Days? This album tackles many different topics, tragedies, and once again, it's all hidden under these fun, upbeat dance tunes that I suppose are to encourage you to get into the song, and then once you're reeled in, find out the meanings behind them. You think of songs like Dirty Harry, Feel Good Inc., and Don't Get Lost in Heaven, and they're messages of war, the media controlling narratives, and substance abuse might not be as immediately present as songs like Kids with Guns, Last Living Souls, and Every Planet We Reach is Dead. It's important to bring these issues to light, and it's done in such a way that even any kid listening to these songs could discover, which, once again, I think a lot of us did. On this second album of theirs, Albarn and co. really hit their stride and turned into more than just a side project. I mean, you could argue that Gorillaz became bigger than Blur. Enlisting notable producer Danger Mouse really helped the rappers on here shine brighter. Roots Manuva, De La Soul, Booty Brown, MF Doom, and I really wish he and Albarn had done more together because of this, but Gorillaz is an ever-evolving project. Again, the further away we get from the original Gorillaz album, the less prevalent the rock aspects here are, though it's still present on Oh Green World, Every Planet We Reach Is Dead, and White Light. The album also featured notable hits like the slower, more somber El Mañana, as well as the upbeat dance tune Dare. And so I will be stamping Demon Days with an A- grading. I think it's surely Gorillaz' best with so many great upbeat tunes despite the simultaneously dark and apocalyptic nature to it. I think it's probably one of the most iconic albums of the 2000s as a decade, really allowing them to further create this virtual band idea. Those have been my thoughts on Gorillaz' discography, ranking all their albums. Let me know how I did. Let me know what you thought, how you would rank them, and I appreciate you for tuning in. Until next time.